My son wrecked the gaming chair my stepson's dead father left him. I dismissed his grief with a replacement, silenced his pain by grounding him for sulking, and convinced myself I did nothing wrong until reality hit me. There is a specific moment when you realize you have not been the person you thought you were. Not the slow accumulation of doubt. Not the general unease of someone who suspects they have been less than perfect. The specific moment. The one with a location and a time and a physical sensation, like the floor dropping an inch beneath your feet. Mine was a Tuesday evening in March, sitting at a kitchen table across from my wife, watching her hands shake while she held a mug she had stopped drinking from. She was not yelling. She had moved past yelling into something quieter and more permanent, and she was looking at me the way you look at someone when you are deciding something, and I understood, with the kind of clarity that only arrives too late, exactly what she was deciding. She was deciding whether there was anything left. I sat there and I thought about the gaming chair. I thought about what I had done and what I had said and what I had refused to understand for 3 weeks while a 14-year-old boy grieved alone in a room I had told him to stay in until he could behave better. And I understood, in that kitchen, that I had broken something that a replacement could not fix. That was the whole problem, wasn't it? I had believed in replacements. My name is not important. What is important is that I am 43 years old and I have been married to Diane for 4 years and I have a biological son, Connor, who is 12, and a stepson, Elliot, who is 14 and who lost his father, Diane's first husband, to a cardiac event when Elliot was 9 years old. I want to establish Elliot before I establish anything else, because this story is about him and what was done to him and I have spent enough time making it about me. Elliot is 14 and he is quiet in the way that children who have been through something large are quiet, not shy, not withdrawn, but interior. He processes things in a depth that does not always surface in conversation and that I had, in the 4 years I had been his stepfather, consistently misread as distance or indifference or, on my worst days, attitude. He was not distant. He was deep. There is a difference that I did not take the time to understand. His father's name was Robert. Robert died of a heart attack at 41, which is 2 years younger than I am now, and Elliot was 9 years old and found out at school and spent the rest of that day being handled by adults who did not know what to do with a 9-year-old sitting in the size of that news. He has been living with that loss for 5 years. He will be living with it for the rest of his life. I knew this. I knew all of this in the abstract, factual way that you know things you have been told. What I did not do, for 4 years, was know it in the way that changes how you move around someone. The way that makes you careful with what you touch. I was not careful with what I touched. The chair. Robert had been a gamer. This is relevant not because it is charming or because it makes him a more sympathetic figure, but because it is the thread that connects the thing I need to describe. He had a gaming setup in the house he shared with Diane, and when he died, Diane had made the decision to preserve what she could of his things for Elliot, to create a path for Elliot to grow into a relationship with objects that had belonged to his father, that carried his father's texture and presence. The gaming chair was the primary piece of this. A good chair, well made, the kind that holds its shape over years. Robert had bought it himself, had sat in it for hours, had, according to Diane, called it the best purchase he had ever made in a tone that suggested he was joking and also slightly meant it. When Elliot got old enough to be interested in gaming, he had inherited the setup, and the chair in particular had become the specific, physical site of his connection to his father. He played in it. He did homework in it sometimes. He sat in it when he was not doing anything at all, just existing in the space of something his father had chosen and owned and used. Diane told me once, early in our relationship, that she sometimes found Elliot just sitting in the chair with headphones on and nothing playing, and that she understood this as something she did not need to interrupt. I had registered this information. I had not held it. Connor is 12 and he is a different kind of child than Elliot. Louder, more surface, more immediately legible. He is funny and impulsive and he breaks things with the cheerful carelessness of someone who has not yet learned that some things cannot be unbroken. He is also mine, my child, the one whose defenses I have always instinctively located first, and I want to name that explicitly because it is the thing underneath everything that happened. When your child and someone else's child are in conflict, there is a pull. A gravitational pull toward your own. It does not make you a monster. It makes you a parent with unexamined instincts. What makes you a monster, or what makes you something you do not want to be, is when you follow that pull without examining it. When you let it be the thing that decides without bringing your actual judgment to bear. I followed the pull. For 3 weeks, I let it decide. What happened is not complicated in its facts. Connor, 12 years old and curious and careless and not malicious, got into Elliot's room while Elliot was at school. He was not supposed to be in there. This was a household rule, the rooms were private, Elliot's in particular had a specific privacy that had been established and communicated. Connor had been in there before and had been redirected before and had apparently decided, on this particular afternoon, that the rule applied less than his interest in the gaming setup. He sat in the chair. He was moving it around, spinning it, the way you do when you are 12 and things are for using and the using is the point. The chair tipped. Connor, trying to catch himself, grabbed the back and the mechanism that controlled the recline snapped. Not a minor snap. A structural one. The chair's back would not hold upright after that. It listed to one side, and when you tried to sit in it fully it dropped back at an angle that made it unusable in the way it was supposed to be used. It was broken. Not destroyed, not in pieces, but broken in the specific way of something that needs a repair it cannot get because the manufacturer had discontinued the part, and replacement required either an expensive custom fix or accepting a chair that no longer worked correctly. Connor told me when I got home. He was guilty and scared in the way of a child who knows he has done something wrong and is hoping that the telling earns credit. I listened. I looked at the chair. I assessed the damage. And then I did the thing that I'm going to spend the rest of this accounting explaining. I told Connor it was an accident and we would sort it out. Then I ordered a new gaming chair online. A better one, technically, more expensive, more features. And I told myself that I had solved the problem. I told Elliot that evening. He came home from school and I sat him down and I told him that Connor had accidentally damaged the chair and that I had already ordered a replacement that was nicer than the original and would arrive by the end of the week. I said it with the energy of someone delivering good news, or at least neutral news that had already been handled, because in my mind I had handled it. The look on Elliot's face when I told him is the one I see most clearly when I'm trying to sleep. He did not yell. Elliot does not yell. He went very still in the way he goes still when something is too large to immediately process, and he looked at me, and then he looked past me, and then he said, very quietly, "That was my dad's chair." "I know," I said. "The new one will be better." He looked at me for another moment. I did not understand what the look meant. I understand now. It was the look of someone who has just confirmed a suspicion they had been hoping was wrong. He went to his room. What I expected, a day or two of quiet, the grief of a teenager who had lost something, the gradual return to baseline as the new chair arrived and was integrated. I had handled worse situations with Connor and they had resolved in this general time frame, and I applied this template to Elliot without examining whether the template fit. What happened? Elliot did not return to baseline. The new chair arrived. He did not assemble it. Diane offered to help him set it up. He said quietly that he did not want it. She did not push. The box sat in the corner of his room. He was not dramatic about any of this. He went to school. He came home. He ate dinner with the family with the particular composure of someone doing what is required. But he was not present in the way he had been present before, and the chair he had played in and sat in and just existed in was gone, and the box in the corner of his room was not a solution to anything. I watched this for 5 days and then I made it worse. I told him he needed to move on. Not in those words, not quite, but in words that amounted to the same thing. I sat him down and I said that I understood he was upset, but that accidents happened and Connor hadn't meant to do it, and the new chair was objectively a better piece of equipment, and at some point we had to be able to be a family that moved forward instead of staying stuck in things that couldn't be changed. I said the word staying stuck. To a 14-year-old who had lost his father at 9 and who was grieving a chair that was the last physical piece of his father's everyday life. I said staying stuck. He listened to all of it. He nodded in the places where nodding seemed required. He said okay. And then he went back to his room and the box in the corner was still in the corner. 3 more days passed. Diane was quiet in a way I was reading as her processing the situation. I would later understand she was giving me the opportunity to see what I was doing on my own before she said what needed to be said. I did not see it on my own. On day 8 after the chair broke, I came home to find Elliot in the living room instead of his room, which was unusual. He was not watching television or on his phone. He was just sitting there in the specific way of someone who needed to be around people without being able to be around people. Connor came through the living room and made a joke, the kind of 12-year-old joke that is harmless in most contexts, something about the old chair not being that great anyway, said without cruelty and without any understanding of what he was touching. Elliot's composure cracked. Not a big crack. He said, tightly and quietly, that Connor didn't know what he was talking about and should leave him alone. Connor, being 12, pushed back. Said he was just saying. Said Elliot needed to get over it. I was in the doorway of the kitchen watching this and I did the thing I did. I told Elliot to watch his tone. Not Connor. Elliot. I told the grieving 14-year-old who had lost his father's chair to watch his tone with the 12-year-old who had broken it. Elliot looked at me. I do not know what he was looking for. Whatever it was, he did not find it. He went to his room and he did not come out for dinner. This is the part I need to account for most carefully because it represents the full depth of what I was doing without understanding I was doing it. I grounded him. The next day, after a night in which he had missed dinner and had not emerged and I had let that go without checking on him, I went to his room and I told him that his behavior the night before had been unacceptable. That the way he had spoken to Connor was rude. That sulking in his room and refusing to engage with the family was a choice he was making and that choices had consequences, and that for the next week he would be losing his phone and staying in on the weekend. I used the word sulking. For grief. I used the word sulking for grief. He looked at me while I said all of this. He did not argue. He did not explain. He handed me his phone and he turned back to his desk and he did not say another word, and I walked out of that room having just told a child who was grieving his dead father that his grief was a behavior problem that required punishment. Diane was in the hallway. She had heard everything. She looked at me with an expression I could not read in the moment and that I understand now as the expression of a woman who is making a decision. She did not say anything that day. She waited. I think she was hoping I would hear myself. I did not hear myself. The week of the grounding was the worst week in my marriage. Not because of what happened. Because of what I refused to see was happening. Elliot served the grounding with the same quiet composure he had brought to everything else. He went to school. He came home. He sat at dinner. He did not have his phone. He did not complain. He was simply, completely, not present in the way that a person is not present when they have understood something about their situation and have decided to survive it rather than fight it. Diane and I spoke less than we ever had. She was there, she was doing everything a functioning household requires, but there was a quality to her presence that I had not encountered before and that I was choosing to attribute to the general stress of the situation rather than examining what it was actually telling me. Connor, to his credit, seemed increasingly uncomfortable, in the way that 12-year-olds become uncomfortable when they can sense that an injustice is happening that they are somehow at the center of. He came to me once, midweek, and said that maybe it was his fault about the chair and that maybe Elliot shouldn't be grounded. I told him it was fine and that he should not worry about it. I was so confident in my own handling of this that I reassured the 12-year-old who had broken the chair that his grieving stepbrother's punishment was appropriate. The floor dropped an inch on a Tuesday evening. The grounding ended on a Sunday. On Tuesday of the following week, Diane asked me to sit with her at the kitchen table after the boys were in their rooms. She sat down. She put her hands around a mug. She did not drink from it. She told me what I had done. Not with anger, not by then. She had moved past the anger and into the specific, quiet register of someone who has decided that this conversation is the one where everything gets said, finally, and said clearly, and whoever is on the receiving end has to decide what to do with it. She told me that Elliot's father had bought that chair himself. That Elliot had been 9 years old when Robert died and that for 5 years the chair had been the place in the house where Elliot was closest to his father. That when he sat in it he was not just sitting in a chair. That this was not abstract or sentimental in a soft, negotiable way. That this was real and specific and the kind of thing that a stepfather who had been in his life for 4 years should have understood well enough to lead with when he found out what Connor had done. She told me that what I should have done, the moment Connor told me, was go to Elliot. Not order a chair. Not solve the logistical problem. Go to Elliot and sit with him and say that Connor had done something that could not be undone and that I was sorry and that his grief was not a problem to be managed but a reality to be witnessed. She told me that instead I had handed him a box and called it a solution. She told me that when the box was not a solution, when he could not make himself want the replacement for the irreplaceable thing, I had told him he was stuck and needed to move forward. She told me that when his composure cracked, I had protected Connor and corrected Elliot. She told me that I had punished a grieving child for grieving. She told me these things in a voice that was very steady and very quiet, and when she finished she looked at me with the expression I had seen when I arrived at the kitchen table, the one that was deciding something. She said, I need to know if you understand what you did. Not if you're sorry. Not if you'll do better. If you understand. I sat across from her and I tried to give her the real answer. I was not sure that I did. Understanding is not the same as knowing. I knew the facts of what I had done from the moment Diane laid them out at the kitchen table. I knew them in the way you know things that are presented to you with enough clarity that denial is not available as a response. I knew that I had failed Elliot. I knew that I had grounded him for grieving. I knew that I had treated the irreplaceable as interchangeable and then blamed him for not being able to make the same trade. But knowing is not understanding. Understanding is what happens when the knowing reaches the depth where it changes something. When it gets past the rational acknowledgement and into the place where you actually feel the size of what you did. I did not understand yet. I told Diane I thought I did. I said the right things at the kitchen table. I said I could see how I had handled it badly and that I was going to make it right with Elliot and that I was sorry. I said these things and I meant them in the way you mean things when you have understood them rationally and believe that rational understanding is the same as the other kind. She looked at me for a long moment. She said, okay. Just okay. Not relieved. Not reassured. Okay. In the voice of someone who has decided to give something time to prove itself rather than energy to debate. I went to bed that night believing I had turned a corner. I had not yet turned the corner. I was still in the hallway before it. I knocked on Elliot's door the next morning before school. He said come in with the flat, neutral voice he had developed over the past 2 weeks, the voice of someone who has reduced their expectations of a conversation before it starts. I sat on the edge of his desk chair. He was at his desk, not doing anything, just sitting there. The box was still in the corner. I told him I was sorry about the chair. I told him I understood it had been important to him. I told him I should have handled it differently and that grounding him had been wrong and that I was sorry for that too. He listened. He nodded. He said, it's okay. And he said it in the way people say it's okay when they have learned that saying it ends the conversation and ending the conversation is better than continuing it. Not forgiveness. Not acceptance. Transaction. A 14-year-old offering the words that would make the adult in the room feel better so the adult would leave. I heard it as acceptance. I was so primed to hear acceptance that I heard it in words that were explicitly not offering it. I told him I was glad we talked. I left. I spent that day at work with a lightened feeling of someone who has addressed a problem. I had addressed nothing. I had given Elliot an apology shaped to make me feel better and then left the room when he gave me the response that confirmed I felt better. Diane asked that evening how it had gone. I said good. I said I thought we were okay. She asked what Elliot had said. I told her. She was quiet. She asked, did he seem okay? To you? Really? I thought about the flat voice and the it's okay and the desk he was sitting at with nothing in front of him. I said, I think he's still processing. She said, yes. Just yes. And then she went to do something in the other room, and I stayed where I was, and the word yes sat in the air where she had been. The box was still in the corner of Elliot's room. I noticed this a few days after the conversation. I noticed it and I let myself notice it instead of looking away, and I sat with what it meant. The box was still there because Elliot did not want the new chair. He had said as much, quietly, weeks ago, and I had not listened. I had ordered a chair and called it a solution, and when the solution was rejected I had treated the rejection as a behavior problem. I had bought a chair and thought I was solving grief. The box in the corner was telling me something I had been refusing to hear since it arrived. I went to Diane that evening and I asked her something I should have asked from the beginning. I asked her what the chair had actually meant to Elliot. Not what I understood about it already, but what she knew. What he had told her. What she had seen. She sat down and she told me. She told me that in the first year after Robert died, Elliot had not been able to go into the room with the gaming setup. That it had been too much. That slowly, over months, he had started spending time in the doorway, then inside the room, then eventually at the setup itself. That the first time he had sat in the chair, he had cried, and that this had been, in Diane's understanding, not a bad thing but something necessary. A kind of contact with his father that was the only kind still available. She told me that he had mentioned Robert once, maybe a year ago, while sitting in the chair. That he had said, without context, that he felt like his dad was still around when he was in it. That he had said it in the casual tone of someone mentioning something they expected to be received normally and had then gone back to his game. She told me that she had not pushed on it because she understood that Elliot would share what he could share when he could share it and that the chair was part of how he got there. I sat and I listened to all of this and I felt the understanding begin to arrive. Not as a concept but as a weight. The actual weight of what I had treated as a logistics problem. The chair was where he felt his father was still around. I had sent a 12-year-old who broke it away with a reminder that accidents happen, and I had ordered a replacement by end of day, and I had called that handling it. The weight of it was different from the knowing of it. Heavier. More specific. The kind you cannot rationalize into something manageable because it is already too clearly shaped. I went to Elliot's room that night. Not with a plan. Not with a speech prepared. I knocked and went in and I sat on the floor against the wall, which is not where you sit when you are the authority figure delivering a message, and I said that I needed to talk to him again. He swiveled from his desk and looked at me. The flatness was still there but something in my sitting on the floor seemed to register, seemed to be different enough from the previous conversation to warrant a different quality of attention. I told him what Diane had told me. Not all of it, not the private things that were hers and his between them, but the shape of it. That I understood now what the chair had been. That I understood it had been where he felt his dad. That I understood that when I had handed him a box and called it a solution I had said, without meaning to, that his grief was a logistical problem I could fix if I just found the right replacement. I told him that there was no replacement and that I should have known that from the beginning and that not knowing it was on me. I told him that grounding him for grieving was one of the worst things I had done as a parent and that I was not asking him to forgive it, just to hear that I knew it. He was very still while I said all of this. Not the careful, transactional still of the previous conversation. A different kind. The kind of stillness that happens when someone is actually listening because what they are hearing is not what they expected. When I finished he did not say it's okay. He was quiet for a long time. Then he said, how did you not know what that chair was? Not angry. Genuinely asking. The question of a 14-year-old who wanted to understand something that was genuinely confusing to him. I told him the true answer, which was that I had known it was important to him but I had not stopped to ask how important or what the importance was made of. That I had been in his life for 4 years and I had not done the work of actually understanding what his life was made of. That I had been present without being attentive and I had confused those two things. He looked at me. He said, my dad used to say that chair was his thinking spot. He said it the way you say something you have been holding for a while and have not found the right place to put. Like it had been waiting for a moment and this was the moment. I sat on the floor against his wall and I did not say anything because there was nothing to say that was more important than what he had just said, and I was learning, finally, that being present with someone does not mean filling the space. We sat in the quiet for a while. I called a repair service the next day. Not to replace the chair. To fix it. I spent 4 hours on the phone tracking down a furniture repair specialist who did structural work on chairs, and I found one who said he could look at it and could not promise but would try, and I told him to try. He fixed it. Not perfectly, there is a slight adjustment to how the recline mechanism feels, a softness that was not there before. But it holds. It sits upright. It works. I carried the repaired chair back up to Elliot's room on a Saturday morning. I told him I had found someone who could fix the original and that I had taken it to him and that it was not exactly as it was but that it was his father's chair. He stood in his doorway and he looked at it for a long time. He said, "You fixed it?" I said yes. He looked at me. Something in his face did something I did not have a category for, some movement that was not quite any of the expressions I knew. He said, "Thank you." Then he picked up the box with the new chair in it and handed it to me and said I could return it if I still could or do whatever I wanted with it, and I said okay, and he put the repaired chair back where it had always been and he sat in it. He did not say anything else. He put his headphones on. I carried the box out of his room. Diane was in the hallway. She had seen. Her eyes were wet and she was not trying to hide it. We did not say anything to each other. We did not need to. Things did not fix overnight. I want to be honest about this because the repaired chair was the beginning of repair, not the repair itself, and conflating the two would be its own dishonesty. Elliot did not suddenly become open or easy with me. The distance that had been there for 4 years of my not paying attention did not dissolve because I paid attention once. What changed was smaller and more real than that. He was less defended. The flat, transactional voice appeared less often. When I was in a room with him there was, occasionally, a quality of acknowledgement that had not been there before, a sense that he registered my presence not just as something to navigate but as something that might occasionally be useful or tolerable. For a 14-year-old who had every reason to keep the walls up, that was significant. I started doing things differently. Not dramatically, not with the energy of someone performing a transformation. Quietly. I started asking him questions that were actually interested in their answers rather than questions that were maintaining the appearance of engagement. I started noticing what he noticed and finding out why. I started learning what his life was made of, the thing I should have been doing for 4 years. He is interested in sound design. I did not know this. He had been quietly building an interest in the technical architecture of game audio, how sound is layered and triggered and spatialized to create experience, and he had been doing this in his room without mentioning it to me because I had not been someone he mentioned things to. I know it now. We have talked about it. Not long conversations, not yet, but real ones. Connor and Elliot are a work in progress. This I cannot resolve by the end of this story because it has not been resolved and pretending otherwise would be the kind of dishonesty that would undermine the rest of the honesty. Connor understood something had gone wrong. He is 12 and he processes things the way 12-year-olds process things, which is incompletely and with significant gaps, but he understood that the chair being broken had produced something that was bigger than a broken chair and that he was connected to it. I sat with him separately and I told him, as clearly as I could for a 12-year-old, what that chair had been. Not to make him feel worse than he already felt, but because I thought he deserved to understand the actual size of the thing he had accidentally stepped into. I told him that Elliot's dad had used that chair and that when Elliot used it he felt close to his dad, and that when something like that breaks it is not the same as when a regular thing breaks. Connor was quiet. He is not usually quiet. He said, "I didn't know it was like that." I said I knew he didn't. I said that was partly on me, because I had not done a good enough job of helping him understand what Elliot's loss was and what it looked like in real life inside our house. That I should have been teaching him that the way I should have been demonstrating it, and that I hadn't, and that some of what had happened came from that failure. He asked if Elliot hated him. I said I didn't think so. I said that Elliot was going to need time and that the best thing Connor could do was give him that without making it into something he needed Elliot to resolve for his comfort. Connor absorbed this. He is 12. He will absorb it at 12 and then differently at 15 and differently again later, and that is how children absorb things and I am trying to have patience with the pace of it. Diane and I are still married. I want to say this without making it sound like a victory or a relief or a resolution, because it is not fully any of those things yet. It is a current fact about a marriage that came very close to a different fact and that is rebuilding on ground that was damaged by my handling of this and by 4 years of the underlying pattern that handling revealed. She told me, in one of the conversations we had after the kitchen table, that the chair had not been the beginning of her worry. That she had been watching, for some time, the way I navigated the difference between Connor and Elliot. The way my instincts moved toward Connor first, always. The way I had not done the work of understanding Elliot's loss in a real way and had let that not understanding become a pattern of relating to him as though his loss were context rather than the center of his life. She told me that she had hoped I would find my way to it without her having to name it. That she had made space and waited more than once. That the chair had been the moment when she could not make more space. I asked her why she had not said something sooner. She said she had said things, smaller things, along the way, and that I had received them and adjusted briefly and then returned to the pattern. That she had not known how to say the larger thing without it becoming a referendum on the marriage, and that she had been afraid of what that referendum would find. I sat with that. The marriage had been held together partly by her fear of examining it. That is not a thing I can receive easily. It is also not a thing I am allowed to look away from. We are in couples counseling. We are doing the work that the kitchen table conversation made necessary. Some sessions are hard in the specific way of being asked to see things about yourself that you have organized your self-perception around not seeing. I go anyway. I sit in the discomfort and I try to be honest about what the discomfort is telling me. The thing I keep returning to, the thing that lives in me differently than anything else in this story, is what Elliot said on the floor of his room. My dad used to say that chair was his thinking spot. He had been holding that. He had been carrying that piece of his father for years, in a room I had walked past without stopping, and the chair had been the physical container for it, and I had sent a replacement with 2-day shipping and told myself I had handled it. I think about Robert, who died at 41 and who is younger than I am now and who left behind a 9-year-old who grew into a 14-year-old who still needed his thinking spot. I think about what it means to lose a parent at 9. Not in the abstract. In the specific, daily, accumulating way of a child who goes to school and comes home and does homework and grows up and learns things and does all of it with a shape beside him where a person used to be. I had been in his life for 4 years and I had not stopped to actually look at that shape. I had been a presence in the house without being a presence in his life, and I had managed the superficial logistics of blended family life without doing the harder, slower work of understanding who was in the family I had joined and what they were carrying. I am not going to redeem this story into something with a clean lesson because life does not work that way and Elliot deserves more than being the subject of a lesson I learned. What I can say is that I am trying to pay a different kind of attention now. The kind that asks questions and waits for real answers. The kind that does not mistake a new chair for a solution to a loss. The kind that knows the difference between something that can be replaced and something that cannot. I did not know the difference. I know it now in the way that costs something to know. And the cost is not mine alone. That is the part I have to live with. That is the part I will always have to live with. The thinking spot is repaired. What I did in the weeks before I repaired it is not.